Secrets breathe in the dark, but they always scream in the light. She thought she loved a simple woodsman, only to uncover a royal conspiracy that reduced her existence to a convenient lie. Fleeing a fake life, she stumbled straight into the arms of his most dangerous enemy. Gladys White wiped the damp hair from her forehead, her fingers stained with the green sap of crushed yarrow and ground sage. The small stone-walled cottage smelled of dried herbs, wood smoke, and the lingering, comforting scent of cedar and musk that belonged to Toriel. For 3 years they had lived in the quiet fringes of the Oakhaven Valley, a neutral territory where rogue wolves and outcasts sought refuge from the brutal pack politics of the continent. Toriel had presented himself as a solitary hunter, a man who had lost his pack to a harsh winter famine. Gladys, an apothecary whose grandmother had taught her the ancient ways of healing, had taken him in. Over time, shared meals turned into shared glances, and finally a shared life. They were entirely devoted to one another, or so Gladys believed with every fiber of her being. Toriel was away on what he claimed was a 3-day hunting expedition near the southern ridge. He had kissed her forehead that morning, his amber eyes soft, promising to bring back enough pelts to trade for winter supplies. Left alone, Gladys decided to finally repair the loose floorboard beneath their heavy oak bed frame, a task they had ignored for months. Prying the ancient wood up with an iron chisel, she expected to find nothing but damp earth and perhaps an errant mouse nest. Instead, her fingers brushed against something wrapped in oiled leather. It was a heavy, ornate box completely out of place in their humble rustic cottage. Curiosity overrode her respect for his privacy. Gladys pulled the box into the dim light of the lantern. The locking mechanism was complex, forged of polished steel, but it had not been engaged properly. She lifted the lid, and the world she knew instantly began to fracture. Inside rested a heavy gold signet ring. It bore the crest of a roaring wolf, clutching a golden crown, the unmistakable seal of the House of Alistair, the royal ruling family of the Southern Kingdom. The Alistairs were notoriously ruthless, ruling their vast territories with an iron fist. But it was not just the ring that made Gladys's heart stop. It was the stack of parchment letters beneath it, bound in a velvet ribbon. With trembling hands, she untied the ribbon and unfolded the most recent letter. It was dated a mere 2 weeks ago, bearing the elegant, sweeping handwriting of King Frederick Alistair. Toriel, my son and crown prince. Your time playing the commoner in the dirt must come to an end. The treaties with the Eastern Steppes are finalized. Lady Isabella awaits her betrothed. You have delayed this union long enough, indulging in this peasant fantasy. You are to return to the capital before the first snow falls to claim your throne and your high-born mate. Leave the apothecary. She was a convenient distraction, but she has no place in a royal court. Dispose of the situation cleanly. Gladys stopped breathing. The air in the cottage suddenly felt suffocating, thick with a deceit so profound it made her physically ill. My son and crown prince. Toriel was not a rogue hunter. He was Toriel Alistair, the heir to the most powerful werewolf kingdom in the southern hemisphere. She read through the older missives, each one driving a rusted blade deeper into her soul. He had been reporting back to his family the entire time. He had known of his arranged marriage to Lady Isabella for over a year. He had planned his departure. Every tender word whispered in the dark, every promise of a quiet future, building a family in the valley, had been a calculated lie. He had used her home as a comfortable hideaway, while his father waged territorial wars, keeping his heir safe and hidden until the political climate stabilized. Gladys dropped the parchment, as if it were a coiled serpent. A profound icy clarity washed over her. Toriel would return in 2 days. He would likely offer a sweet smile, pack his belongings under the guise of finding them a better home, and vanish into the night, leaving her with nothing but shattered memories. Or worse, he might follow his father's advice and dispose of the situation cleanly. She would not wait to find out. Moving with a quiet, lethal efficiency, Gladys gathered her most essential supplies. She packed a sturdy leather rucksack with dried meats, hard cheese, medical supplies, and her thickest wool cloaks. She deliberately left behind anything Toriel had given her: the carved bone comb, the silver chain, the soft linen dresses. As she stood at the doorway of the cottage, she looked back one last time. She didn't leave a note. She didn't destroy the box. She left the floorboard, pried open the golden signet ring resting conspicuously on top of the king's letter on the center of their dining table. Let him return to the silence of an empty house. Let him know that she knew exactly what he was. Stepping out into the biting wind of late autumn, Gladys turned her face north. The southern kingdom was Toriel's domain. To survive, she had to cross the treacherous, jagged peaks of the Grey Mountains and enter the northern marches, the territory of the Wallace pack. The Wallaces were the sworn blood rivals of the House of Alistair. It was a dangerous gamble, but a betrayed woman had nothing left to lose. Winter arrived early in the Grey Mountains, bringing vicious winds that howled like dying men through the narrow mountain passes. Gladys had been walking for 6 days. Her boots were worn thin, her lips cracked and bleeding, and her muscles ached with a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. She had used a potent mixture of wolfsbane and pine resin to mask her scent, knowing that once Toriel found the letters, he would likely send trackers. His pride would not allow a commoner to walk away on her own terms. On the 7th day, a blizzard swallowed the mountain path. The snow was blinding a wall of relentless white that disoriented her. Gladys stumbled her knee, striking a jagged rock hidden beneath a snowdrift. She cried out, collapsing into the freezing powder. As the cold began to seep into her bones, numbing the pain and inviting a dangerous heavy sleep, she heard the distinct, terrifying crunch of boots on snow. Not one pair, but several. "Look here," a gruff voice called out over the howling wind. Astray, Gladys tried to push herself up, reaching for the silver hunting knife at her belt, but her frozen fingers refused to cooperate. 4 massive figures loomed out of the whiteout wrapped in heavy furs. Their eyes caught the dim light glowing in shades of gold and sharp amber. Northern wolves. She smells of wild herbs and... One of the wolves leaned in his nose, flaring. He recoiled slightly, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "Southern scent, Alistair territory. I am no friend to the Alistairs." Gladys forced out her voice, raspy and weak. The leader of the patrol, a scarred man with cold grey eyes, sneered. "We'll let the Alpha decide that. Bind her!" They dragged her through the storm for what felt like hours, eventually descending into a sprawling valley shielded from the worst of the winter winds. The stronghold of the northern marches was an architectural marvel, a massive fortress of dark stone and heavy timber built directly into the side of a towering cliff. Iron braziers burned brightly along the battlements, casting a fierce, defiant light against the encroaching dark. Gladys was taken into the great hall, a cavernous room filled with the scent of roasted meat ale and the overwhelming, intimidating musk of hundreds of seasoned warriors. The chatter ceased immediately as the patrol dragged her to the center of the room and forced her to her knees. At the far end of the hall, sitting upon a massive chair carved from the trunk of a petrified oak, was Clint Wallace. The Alpha of the North was a terrifying figure of rumor and legend. He was said to have killed his first rogue at the age of 12 and had successfully defended the northern borders against 3 consecutive southern sieges. Up close, he was even more imposing. Clint possessed a rugged, sharp-angled face, framed by dark, unruly hair and a short, scruffy beard. But it was his eyes that commanded the room, a piercing, intelligent shade of storm blue that seemed to strip away all pretense and see directly into a person's core. He did not wear a crown, nor did he drape himself in velvet and gold like the Southern kings. He wore functional hardened leather armor and a heavy wolf fur mantle. Clint stood his massive frame dominating the space and slowly walked down the stone steps toward her. The hall was dead silent. He stopped a few feet away, his gaze sweeping over her battered, exhausted form. "My border guards claim you carry the stench of the Southern Kingdom." Clint's voice was a deep, resonant baritone that vibrated in Gladys's chest. "Yet you journeyed through the worst blizzard of the decade to cross into my lands. Are you a spy, a fool, or a runaway?" Gladys forced herself to look up, meeting his terrifying blue eyes without flinching. She would not cower. Not anymore. "My name is Gladys White," she said, her voice steadying. "I am an apothecary. I lived in the Neutral Valley, and until 7 days ago, I was sharing my home with a man who called himself a hunter, but was in truth Toriel Alistair." A collective gasp rippled through the hall. Mentioning the Southern Crown Prince in the heart of the northern stronghold was practically a death wish. Clint's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing to dangerous slits. "You claim to be the bedmate of the Southern Prince?" Clint asked, his tone laced with a dangerous skepticism. "Why would he abandon his silk sheets for a commoner in the dirt?" "Because he is a coward." Gladys spat, the anger finally breaking through her exhaustion. "He used the valley to hide from his political duties, while his father negotiated a marriage treaty with the Eastern Steppes. He played house with me to pass the time. I found his royal crest and letters from his king. When I realized my entire life was a fabricated lie, I left him. I seek asylum." Clint stepped closer, crouching down so he was eye level with her. He didn't touch her, but he inhaled deeply, catching the subtle masked scent beneath the wolfsbane. He recognized the underlying pheromones. "You speak the truth," Clint murmured almost to himself. He looked at her, not with pity, but with a calculating respect. "You found out you held the heart of the future Southern king, and instead of blackmailing him or begging for a place at his court, you walked into a frozen wasteland." "I hold no man's heart," Gladys said bitterly, "and I would rather freeze in the truth than live in a warm lie." Clint's mouth twitched into the ghost of a smile. He stood up, turning to face his pack. "Untie her," he commanded. The guards immediately severed the ropes binding her wrists. "We are at war." "Gladys White," Clint said, looking back down at her. "My warriors are injured daily in border skirmishes. You claim to be an apothecary. If you have the skill to heal my people, you will have food, warmth, and absolute protection within my walls. If Toriel Alistair comes looking for the toy he discarded, he will find my armies waiting for him." Gladys looked at the Alpha of the North. There was no deception in his storm blue eyes, no hidden agendas masked by sweet smiles. He offered a brutal, honest transaction. "I accept your terms, Alpha Wallace." Gladys replied, allowing one of the guards to help her to her feet. As Clint led her toward the warmth of the roaring hearth, Gladys realized she had just crossed a point of no return. She had vanished from the life of a secret prince, only to forge an unlikely alliance with his greatest rival. Toriel's betrayal had broken her world, but in the cold, unforgiving north, Gladys was ready to build a new one. The northern fortress of Ironhold was a harsh, unforgiving structure of blackened granite and heavy ironwood, yet to Gladys it felt more like a sanctuary than the idyllic valley cottage ever had. In the Southern Kingdom, she had been a well-kept secret, a fragile thing hidden away from the world. In the north, she was a vital artery to the pack's survival. Within a month of her arrival, Gladys had transformed the damp, disorganized infirmary of the Wallace stronghold into a highly efficient apothecary. She spent her days grinding feverfew brewing poultices of comfrey and willow bark and setting the shattered bones of warriors who returned from the increasingly violent border skirmishes. She worked alongside the pack's elderly physician, a gruff but brilliant man named Reginald Thorne, who quickly realized that the young southern woman possessed a restorative talent that bordered on the miraculous. It was during the darkest hour of the winter solstice that Gladys's true worth was tested. A scouting party returned in the dead of night, carrying Clint's second-in-command, a massive warrior named Roderick, on a makeshift stretcher. He had been struck by 2 southern arrows, but it wasn't the wounds that were killing him. It was the distinct, sickening black veins webbing outward from the puncture sites. Wolfsbane mixed with pulverized silver. Reginald diagnosed, grimly stepping back from the table. It's in his bloodstream. The southern cowards have started lacing their weapons. He won't make it to dawn. He will, Gladys stated, her voice slicing through the despair in the room. She didn't wait for permission. She immediately ordered the aides to bring her boiling water, activated charcoal, and a rare mountain root known as blood leaf that she had scavenged days prior. For 6 grueling hours, Gladys fought a war over Roderick's body. She sliced the wounds open to drain the tainted blood, packed the deep tissue with a searing mixture of herbs that drew the silver particulators out, and forced a foul-smelling charcoal brew down his throat. She barely noticed when the doors to the infirmary opened, and Alpha Clint Wallace stepped inside, remaining in the shadows. When the sun finally crept over the jagged eastern peaks, Roderick's ragged breathing steadied. The black veins began to recede. Gladys, covered in sweat and blood, slumped against the stone wall and slid to the floor, her energy entirely spent. Clint emerged from the shadows, offering her a water skin. "You saved my most trusted brother," he said, his deep voice resonating with an unfamiliar softness. Gladys took the water skin with trembling hands, wiping the exhaustion from her eyes. "I honor my agreements, Alpha. You gave me sanctuary. I give you my skills." Clint sat beside her on the cold stone floor, ignoring the stark difference in their status. He wore no crown, only his battered leather armor, smelling of snow and pine. "You are relentless, Gladys. Toriel Alistair was a blind fool to look at a warrior and see only a peasant." The mention of Toriel's name no longer brought tears. It brought a cold, hardening resolve. Over the weeks, Gladys and Clint had developed a quiet, intense, mutual respect, where Toriel had constantly spoken over her and shielded her from his reality. Clint sought her counsel. He discussed troop movements with her, asking about the terrain of the southern valleys she knew so well. He looked at her, not as a possession to be protected, but as an equal to be valued. "He saw what was convenient," Gladys replied, looking up into Clint's storm-blue eyes. For a lingering moment, the air between them shifted, growing heavy and charged with an electric tension that made Gladys's heart race. It was a primal magnetic pull, something she had never felt with Toriel. Before Clint could speak, the heavy oak doors of the infirmary burst open. A scout, his face pale and frostbitten, rushed in and fell to one knee. "Alpha!" The scout gasped, breathless. A spy from the southern capital, Bartholomew Higgins, just crossed the border. He brings urgent tidings from the house of Alistair. Clint stood, his demeanor instantly transforming from a quiet companion to a terrifying warlord. "Report. King Frederick is dead," the scout announced, the words echoing off the stone walls. "Poisoned in his own bedchambers. The arranged marriage with Lady Isabella of the Eastern Steppes was annulled by force. Toriel Alistair has crowned himself king. He executed his father's inner circle. Gladys's blood ran cold. Toriel had always played the part of the reluctant gentle prince with her. The idea of him orchestrating a violent coup and murdering his own father was horrifying. And his first royal decree? Clint demanded, his jaw clenched tight. The scout swallowed hard, his eyes darting nervously toward Gladys. He has declared a blood hunt. He is not expanding Territory Alpha. He has mobilized the entire Southern Army and is marching toward the Grey Mountains. He sent an envoy with a single demand: surrender Gladys White to him by the next full moon, or he will burn the North to ash. Silence descended on the infirmary. Gladys stood up, her legs shaking slightly, though she forced her chin high. The man she thought she knew was a monster, a deranged tyrant who viewed her not as a lost love, but as a stolen piece of property that his massive ego could not allow him to lose. Clint turned to her, his expression unreadable. He stepped closer, towering over her, the immense, suffocating aura of an alpha radiating from his broad shoulders. Toriel believes I am a man who trades innocent lives to avoid a fight, Clint said, his voice a low, lethal rumble. He reached out his rough, calloused fingers, gently brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. The touch sent a jolt of pure, fiery energy straight to Gladys's core, confirming what her wolf had been whispering for weeks. I am not. Clint finished, his eyes locking onto hers with a fierce, possessive loyalty. Let the boy king come. We will show him what happens when a pampered prince steps into a true alpha's domain. The Whispering Plains. A vast stretch of frozen tundra separating the northern marches from the southern mountain passes was a terrifying sight. The Southern Army had arrived. Over 5,000 warriors clad in polished steel and crimson cloaks stood in perfect disciplined formation. At the center of their vanguard rode King Toriel Alistair atop a massive black destrier, wearing a crown of jagged gold. From the high ridge above the plains, the northern pack looked down upon the invaders. They were fewer in number, perhaps 3,000 strong, but they were hardened veterans of the bitter, cold wild and ferocious. Gladys stood at the edge of the ridge, the freezing wind whipping her dark hair around her face. She wore a heavy cloak of silver-tipped wolf fur, custom-made to fit her shoulders, and a hardened leather bodice reinforced with iron. She was no longer the soft, naive apothecary of Oakhaven. Clint stood beside her, his massive frame radiating an immense grounding heat. The night before the battle, under the brilliant dancing lights of the northern aurora, Clint had not asked her to hide in the crypts with the children and the elderly. Instead, he had taken her to the sacred moonstone at the center of the keep. There, with no coercion and absolute honesty, they had recognized the mate bond that tied their souls together. Toriel had merely been a youthful attachment, a trauma bond built on deception. Clint was her true equal, her fated mate. He had marked her, cementing her status, not as a refugee, but as the Luna of the northern marches. "Are you ready?" Clint asked quietly, not taking his eyes off the Southern Army below. "I am tired of running from him," Gladys replied, her voice steady and clear. "Let us end this." Clint nodded, signaling his captains. The massive war horns of the north sounded a deep, bone-rattling bellow that echoed across the ice. Clint and Gladys, flanked by Roderick and a dozen elite guards, mounted their horses and rode slowly down the ridge to meet Toriel for the traditional parley. Toriel rode forward to meet them, escorted by Lord Reginald Beaumont, one of his father's last surviving generals. As Toriel drew near, Gladys felt a wave of revulsion. The handsome, charming woodsman she had loved was entirely gone. In his place was a man consumed by arrogance and paranoia, his amber eyes manic and bloodshot. Toriel's gaze completely bypassed Clint, locking hungrily onto Gladys. A twisted, relieved smile broke across his face. "Gladys, my sweet," Toriel said, his voice dripping with a condescending affection. "Look at what these barbarians have forced you to wear. Come to me. The farce is over. I am king now. No one can tell us what to do. I have a carriage waiting to take you back to our valley." Gladys did not flinch. She sat tall in her saddle, looking at him with absolute contempt. "There is no us, Toriel. There never was. You lied to my face for 3 years. You murdered your own father for a crown. I am not your sweet, and I am not your pet." Toriel's smile vanished, replaced by a dark, ugly scowl. "You are confused. They have manipulated you. Clint Wallace is a savage who will use you and discard you." He finally looked at Clint, his lip curling in disgust. "Hand her over, Wallace. Do not make your people die for a peasant whore who belongs in my bed." A low, terrifying snarl ripped from Clint's chest, the sound so monstrous it made Toriel's warhorse nervously step back. "Address my Luna with respect, boy king," Clint commanded, his voice echoing across the silent plains with the undeniable authority of a true alpha. Toriel froze, his amber eyes snapping back to Gladys's neck. There, proudly displayed above the collar of her fur cloak, was the fresh, undeniable bite mark of an alpha's claim. The realization hit Toriel like a physical blow. The woman he had kept hidden in the dirt, the woman he thought he could manipulate and reclaim at his leisure, was now the reigning queen of his greatest enemy. "No," Toriel whispered, his face contorting with absolute fury. "She is mine." With a scream of unhinged rage, Toriel abandoned his horse, his body violently twisting and snapping as he shifted mid-air. He landed on the frost-covered ground as a massive reddish-brown wolf, his fangs bared, charging recklessly at Clint. Clint was ready. He vaulted from his horse, shifting in a blur of motion. He did not become a wolf, he became a nightmare. Clint's wolf form was gargantuan, a terrifying beast of solid muscle and pitch-black fur, easily a head taller and twice as broad as Toriel. The two alphas collided with a sickening crunch of bone and muscle. The armies watched in breathless silence as their leaders fought a duel of absolute supremacy. Toriel fought with wild, unpredictable rage, snapping and tearing, trying to land a lethal blow, but Clint fought with the seasoned, brutal efficiency of a warlord who had spent his entire life defending his home. Toriel lunged for Clint's throat. Clint effortlessly sidestepped the sloppy attack, his massive jaws snapping down on Toriel's right shoulder. Toriel howled in agony as Clint lifted him entirely off the ground and slammed him brutally into the frozen earth. Clint placed a massive black paw on Toriel's throat, applying just enough pressure to choke the breath from the Southern King. Toriel whined his struggles, ceasing as panic flooded his eyes. Clint could have crushed his windpipe then and there, ending the war in a single heartbeat. Instead, Clint leaned down, his eyes glowing with an intense, terrifying blue light, and let out a roar of absolute dominance that forced every southern wolf in the vanguard to lower their heads in instinctual submission. Clint stepped back, allowing Toriel to gasp for air, transforming back into his human form, naked, bleeding, and utterly humiliated in front of his entire army. "You bring an army to my borders for a woman who pities you," Clint growled, shifting back to his human form, completely unfazed by the freezing temperature. A guard rushed forward to drape a cloak over his shoulders. Clint looked at the southern generals. "Your king is a broken, undisciplined child. Take your army and march south, Lord Beaumont. If a single one of your soldiers crosses into my territory again, I will not spare him." Walk out. Lord Beaumont looked at the bleeding, pathetic form of Toriel on the ice, then up to the imposing figure of Clint and the regal, unyielding posture of Gladys. The old general knew a lost cause when he saw one. He raised his fist, signaling the retreat. Toriel screamed, demanding they fight, commanding them to attack, but his men ignored him. His aura was shattered. 2 guards hoisted the crying, disgraced king onto a horse and led him away in shame. Gladys watched the red cloaks of the Southern army turn their backs and march away. A profound sense of peace washed over her. She spurred her horse forward, meeting Clint in the center of the battlefield. He reached up, taking her hand, his stormy blue eyes filled with pride. She had found a secret prince in the woods and lost everything, but in the frozen, unforgiving north, beside a man whose heart was as honest as his blade. Gladys White had found her true pack, her true mate, and a throne that could never be taken away. Will Gladys find her true place beside the formidable Clint Wallace, or will Toriel Alistair tear the realms apart to reclaim the woman he discarded? The Game of Thrones and fated mates has only just begun. Hit that like button, share this wild journey with your fellow romance lovers, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss the thrilling continuation of this medieval drama.